Welcome to another episode of Let's Parley, where we are here to encourage you to bet on yourself and pursue all that life has in store for you. I'm your host, Monty Taylor, and without further ado, let's parlay. What's up, family? As always, thanks for tuning in to another episode. I really want to honor this time that I have with you, and I want to honor God with this time more importantly. And yeah, we are at episode 7, which is crazy to think about. My goal for the year is 30 episodes. So I feel really good about the pace, dropping one episode per week. Hopefully, you have been enjoying the content and, I've been really taking some things with you with each one of these episodes and hopefully a little bit entertained as well too. And with this episode, I am really excited about this because I feel like this is the one thing that really unlocked a lot of what I needed to unlock in order to take the next step. And it wasn't just like physically, but more mentally than anything. If you recall, during the last episode, we talked a lot about, having to become a new person in order to achieve new things and having to let go of old things. And we talked about the mind. In this one, in this particular episode, I should say, I really want to hone in on that as much as possible because it is the hardest thing to control is our thoughts. And I believe it's the hardest thing to control because it is actually impossible to control. So I want to dive into this topic with you all. But of course, as we always do, I like to start off with a little bit of a story, a little bit of a personal testimony, just from my experience and maybe from some experiences I've had with clients and friends and family and stuff. Let's talk about gym anxiety. Now, we haven't really discussed fitness all that much on this podcast. It's a huge part of my life. It was the reason why I decided to quit my 9 to 5 and completely go into the entrepreneurial space was because of my passion for fitness and wanting to help people. So it's only right that we discuss it. But the thing that I have, or maybe I should say I initially struggled with, was gym anxiety, right? And I'm sure everybody who is new to the gym or who hasn't been to the gym in a while or who's maybe never stepped foot in a gym struggles with these thoughts, right? A lot of the times we walk into the gym for the first time, and because it's a new place and because of a lot of the culture on social media with people recording people who are doing weird stuff, it's almost as if we've convinced ourselves that if we walk in there, all eyes are on us. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I lie to you not. You go into that gym, most people are trying to figure out what they're doing with themselves and more worried about how you're perceiving them, if anything. Nobody's worried about you. Okay. A lot of the times we have just overinflated our egos to think that the world revolves around us, and that is just not the case. Some of my own personal experience, I'll say, is when I first walked into the gym and I wanted to, lift a bit heavier and whatnot. As a guy, I was always, I was taller and all that sort of stuff, but I think I had like this weird dynamic where I thought I was supposed to be stronger than what I actually was. And it made me feel like a little bit small going into the gym when I first started. And what happened was is I would walk in and I would try to ego lift. And I'd be like, yeah, I belong here. I'm big man. I'm big strong man. And I lift big weights and put them down. But the reality is that again, nobody cares what you're lifting. Uh and a lot of the times if they do, they're not going to say anything. And if they do say something, it's probably going to be positive more than it's going to be negative. All right. I always kind of joke because I've realized, especially living in different areas. So, I was born in New York. Most of my family's from New York. I grew up in Delaware for the most part. And then I lived in Philly for 3 years, moved to LA, lived there for 2 years. And now I'm down in Austin, Texas. And it's been about 10 months since I've been down here. And what I've realized is being in all different parts of the United States, folks from the Northeast, and this is something we might have to work on, okay? folks from the Northeast, in particular, New York, are very, very paranoid about people looking at them and looking at them for a particular reason that tends to be negative. All right. Like, I don't know how many times I've been talking to somebody and they're like, yo, why are they looking at me like that? Like, yo, I know what they're trying. And it's like you create this whole narrative in your head that has no evidence of being true, just all kind of concocted from your past experiences. And what tends to happen is if you were to really break down the situation, that person is probably just oblivious to the fact that you're thinking these things, and they're probably also thinking about 10 different things that have nothing to do with you. You might have just caught their glance in the midst of them scanning a room. And it could just be that small moment. And people from the Northeast, I tell you, they hold on to that moment and they glorify it. They're like, oh, that's it. That person is thinking this, that, and the third. And it is just a never-ending cycle of just really false thoughts, or at least thoughts that don't have any evidence to be true. So, anyway, if you know anybody who's from New York or from the Northeast in general, and you've seen this happen, comment below because you know exactly what I'm talking about. And for my folks from the Northeast and from New York and all that, yeah, I came in your house today. Yep, I'm talking about you. I'm sorry, but I struggle with the same thing as well too. So we're all in this together. But transitioning into more of the meat and potatoes of this topic, I wanted to start off by saying we've all had thoughts that feel so real, but just because it showed up in your head doesn't mean it belongs there. All right. Just like I was saying about gym anxiety, just as I was saying about folks perceiving that other people are looking at them for a certain reason or thinking something about them for a certain reason, those are all just things that you came up with. Okay. You are not your thoughts, you are an observer of them. Okay, this is a really, really powerful thing to realize. And that's where I want to start off with is us just coming to a common understanding that we are not our thoughts. A lot of the times people struggle with all sorts of mental health issues because they believe the voice in their head. They think that that is them and they identify with those thoughts. And when those thoughts tend to be negative, it could bring down your mood. It could bring down your personal belief of what's possible for the future, or whether you should be moving on or not. And that's a really, really common struggle that people deal with. So I wanted to just break down why you are not your thoughts. Okay, so let's just think through where thoughts may actually come from, right? Thoughts are usually just mental activity, right? It's not your identity. So a lot of the times, I don't know if anyone has ever experienced this, but of course everybody has. I don't even know why I put it that way. Everybody has had a random thought that just came about where you're like, "Man, where did that come from?" And a lot of the times you may not even realize that it was so random and absurd given your situation, because thoughts flow in and out of our heads all the time. And then we'll just go along that journey with that thought. But a lot of times we never really stop to pause and be like, like what was that? Like, where did that come from? And a lot of these thoughts are actually automatic, habitual, and really planted by outside influence. And I want to talk about that a lot today because we are in a moment in time where we are more impacted by outside influence than ever before. There are so many points of stimuli, either social media, YouTube, television, our phones. I mean, there's just so many different things that are planting seeds in our minds, and it's more than ever before. So, something really important to just acknowledge. And you can observe, challenge, and redirect your thoughts. Okay, so this isn't something where you just have to accept or try to control what you're thinking. I do not think that that's even possible, because even when I'm in the best of spirits, even when I'm doing all of the positive self talk, visualizing my future, stating my affirmations, speaking positively to myself, all these different things, even when I have been at the highest of the high when it comes to those like positive mental habits, I still have thoughts that come about. I still have thoughts that just rush into my mind, and I can recognize them. I can get better at acknowledging them, but I'm never, ever going to be able to remove them and control them. All I can do is observe and acknowledge it with my personal conscious so that I can take away what I need to take away from it. So it's one of those things where I think if we just acknowledge that, hey, there's no such thing as just removing negative thoughts or trying to control what you're thinking. If you get into that mindset, then you will struggle. And then depression and anxiety and all those sort of, um, anxious feelings and emotions will come about very quickly because you're not going to feel like you can win. All right. And of course, last episode I started off with a little bit of scripture, and I wanted to continue with that pattern today because I just think that the Bible is such a well full of wisdom. So let's just share a scripture with you. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. All right. We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. You can't take something captive unless it's separate from you. Okay, so just really marinate on that. You're taking your thoughts captive because they're not you. All right. You're not a prisoner to your thoughts. You are the gatekeeper. You are the person who is observing those thoughts coming into your head, and you are deciding what to do with it afterwards. Let's talk about where your thoughts come from. I feel like this is a very, very important thing to discuss. And I want to, start off with a disclaimer to just say that I am not claiming that I know exactly where our thoughts come from. I'm going to throw out some ideas, all right? And you could take whatever you want for yourself based off of your own personal beliefs. But what I will say is that it's more likely that it comes from one of these things that I'll be mentioning, all right? So let's start off with internally, where these thoughts may be coming from, looking at it from an internal perspective. One, you got habits. Okay, so just the things that you do every day, right? That routine that you have can spur certain thoughts. You could be getting up in the morning and you have to brush your teeth because that's just what you do every morning, hopefully. Dirty behinds. But anyway, shower, right? Wash your behind. Okay, like all that sort of stuff. These are habits that you think about, and sometimes they come about unconsciously, but other times they come about consciously because you have to do said thing before you go to work or whatever have you. So it can come from habits. A lot of us, and it's a very common word and it's a very, trendy word nowadays, but it is true. We all do have some sort of trauma, and it all comes in different magnitudes, right? So it's a spectrum. And when I think about trauma, a lot of the times it comes from our childhood. And if we weren't able to have an adult help us process that trauma when it happened in our childhood, we tend to just continue to think about that trauma from a very like childlike perspective, right? Just think about how a child usually thinks: very emotional, very self-centered, not as logical, and very kind of naive. So what I'll say is that if there are thoughts that spur about from trauma very consistently, this is why we have therapy. This is why we have counsel and people who we can talk to about some of those past traumas. So that way we can have an external perspective that could view it from a more adult-like viewpoint, right? Instead of like the child inside who's like, oh, they hurt me, or why did they do this to me? And you're feeling very vulnerable and very innocent. So they can come from trauma as well too. Uh, Lastly, I'll say, on the internal perspective, they can also come from your self-image. How do you view yourself? If your self-image is very negative, then you'll tend to have very negative thoughts about certain situations and whether you could do X, Y, and Z if you try. So that's another place that they can come from. But I really, really want to harp on the external influences because this is where we are most commonly attacked nowadays. Like I said, we have so many external sources of stimuli. Number one, I got to bring up is social media. We are in a point in our lives right now where it is almost shaping our perspective on whether things are good or whether things are bad. I would say that it used to be television and the news, and it's still very much prevalent, but a lot of people are getting their information from social media. So it could be news, news pages, right? Like it could be ABC News or Fox or CNN or whatever that is now posting things and people are reposting and all that sort of stuff. So a lot of the times we are getting a lot of our perspective on the world from social media. I remember there was a day where I had literally just doom scrolled, and we all have fallen victim to it, right? But I had doom scrolled for a few hours, and it was a lot about, some political things that were happening that given day. And I remember I had to just put my phone down because I couldn't stop thinking from that viewpoint. I started looking, like I went out for a walk and I almost had to just like purge a lot of the thoughts and just allow them to run because I kept thinking that everything was terrible. Everything was going to come to an end. There was just no hope or no optimism because I just been consumed with whatever I was doom scrolling on for that entire day. So social media is a huge part of that. Obviously, family, right? Your upbringing, the people that you communicate with mostly, that could be your parents, that could be your siblings, cousins. Um, that very much shapes our thoughts, right? So if you were told something a lot of the time as a kid and that was repeated to you, that could become a reoccurring thought that you may not even be conscious of, but it just always pops up for some reason. And then, of course, culture is going to be a huge part of the external influences that creep into your mind, right? I think the biggest example that I see right now is like this culture of this real tension between both genders, right? Between male and female. Like it's a real tough conversation that I've seen happening on the internet, and I've just really wanted to combat that as much as possible because I really feel like we're meant to be a lot more harmonious in our relationships, whether they're romantic or friendships or just acquaintances. But I can definitely feel this sense of tension right now at the moment. And yeah, I'm sure you've probably observed that as well, too. And hopefully, and I pray that that's something that we are free of with time. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is spiritual influence, right? And I feel like this is a very hard thing to decipher when it comes to the thoughts that creep up in our mind because definitely had some struggles with trying to figure out like, well, is that God telling me that, or is that the enemy telling me that? Is this the devil? Like what is this thought coming from? It doesn't really feel like it's very clear. And a lot of the times we're trying to discern, God's voice versus, our personal fears or whatever have you. And a lot of it could be doubt. A lot of it could be, tactics of your personal adversary. I've told this to a few people, but I think it's very helpful to look at yourself as the main character in your own personal story, in your own personal movie, and think about what you would be telling yourself, what you would be screaming at the screen if you were watching your own story in your own movie, right? Like, what are you like? Oh my God, I wish they would do this right now. That allows you to just take it from a third person perspective. And if you would talk to yourself nicely, I'd like to think that God, an all loving God, would also talk to yourself or would also talk to you nicely. So, just to help you maybe decipher where some of those thoughts may be coming from. Another thing that has helped me as well too is if it causes confusion or if I feel like I'm in between two things or whatever have you, then I personally believe that it's not something from God and it's not something that I should continue to pursue. That's just something that's helped me out. Maybe I've missed some opportunities because of that. Maybe I haven't, but that's just been something that I found to be helpful. And maybe it's something you could try out for yourself. Another scripture that I think I mentioned on the last podcast was from Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? So, what we're really trying to do here in handling our thoughts is renew our perspective on those thoughts that are coming in and not identifying with them as much. Okay. So don't believe everything that you think. All right. So let's talk about maybe some applicable ways to challenge and redirect negative thoughts, because I feel like this is what all of us struggle with. And if we can just have a better defense mechanism for these things, then we will be a lot more at peace, a lot happier, and struggle a lot less with depression, anxiety, worry, doubt, fear, etc. All right. So the first thing, which I think you can probably guess, is just the awareness, right? Catch the thought in real time. And this takes some awareness to do, right? And it also takes some time, maybe in solitude, might even take some time where you're not consuming something, where everything is just quiet. I've recently been doing this where I'll just have a certain portion of my morning where I'm not listening to music, I'm not consuming anything on YouTube or social media. I am just in my thoughts. And I kind of practice observing them and just being aware of them, right? Like, oh, that's an interesting thing. Wow, I don't know where that came from, but you just acknowledge it and allow it to move on. And then you see what happens next. This is a very common practice in meditation as well, too, in at least in a certain type of meditation where you're observing your thoughts. Very helpful. The second step that you do after awareness is ask yourself, is this true? And not only is it true, but is it helpful? Because a lot of the times you might hear something negative pop up in your head as a thought, and you do believe that it's true. You do believe that you're not enough, or that whatever it is that's stopping you from, feeling more capable or whatever have you is true about yourself. And we all struggle with that. But is it helpful? Like, is it helping you move the needle forward? Right? Is it going to allow you to take that next step to overcome it? Or is it just saying something that is negative and doesn't serve an actual purpose other than to distract you and stop you from what you're supposed to do? And then if it is helpful, right? If you ask that question, then the next question that might be helpful to ask is this from God? Right? And again, it could be hard to really discern that at times, but if it's helpful, if it's positive, if it's in alignment with what you've envisioned for your life, or how you would like to see yourself, then I truly believe that it is from God. So that would be the second step, right? Is just assessing the thought itself. And the third is replacing it with a truth. This could be in the form of affirmations, which I'm a big fan of, scripture, which I'm also a big fan of, faith declarations. We just want to create the opposite of whatever that negative thought is, and make that the thought that we repeat to ourselves, so that we consciously put in the work to slowly nudge that thought away from our identity, right? That's the power of affirmations. That's the power of scripture, is it's telling you the truth as opposed to a lie. A lot of the negative thoughts that we have are typically falsehoods that just keep repeating themselves. And because they keep repeating themselves, it's just like a sleazy salesman. Okay, they just repeat the same thing over and over again and just hope that you eventually believe them, right? So is that there's that persistence in the negative thoughts that creates the identity connection. So we just want to dismantle that connection as much as possible. All right, so like I said, awareness, and then acknowledge whether the thought is helpful from God. Is it true? And then the last thing would be to replace that thought with an affirmation, with scripture, with something that you would like to think instead, and what you believe to be true. All right. So I just encourage it, spend some time in prayer, spend some time journaling, and just be still. A lot of you is just, you're all over the place. Okay. You can't sit down, you can't sit still. You got this need to be in motion all the time, or to be doing something, or to be with company. And a lot of you could just really use some time to yourself where you're not consuming anything, you're not around anybody, and it doesn't have to be a long period of time, but it just has to be some time that you take to yourself to really view your thoughts and assess where you're at, and what's been coming about more commonly in your mind. So I think that'll really do you some good. Take it from someone who has definitely struggled with my thoughts and my mental health at times in my life, and it's feels so much more freeing to know that, okay, because I took that stillness to process it, I'm a lot more aware and I'm a lot more prepared to combat those things. Last scripture that I want to leave you with is Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, think about such things. I mean, could it get any more simple than that, right? Whatever is true, whatever is noble. And in order to understand what's true, you got to go to the source of truth. And whatever to understand what's noble, you got to understand what you want to achieve in life and what you're working towards. The enemy doesn't have to destroy you if he can distract you with false thoughts. So again, if you think about this from a perspective of being the main character in your story, if there was a villain in your story who was trying to impede your progress, who couldn't do anything physically to you, but could only do it through your mind, the best way they would go about it is by trying to distract you, by trying to point you in a different direction. Okay. So, something to really hone in on, something to really think about is, okay, is this helping me move forward or is this stopping me? All right. Last thing I want to say is you don't have to believe every thought. You have the power to interrupt, replace, and renew your mind daily. That's in your control. That's in your hands. All right. There's no excuse for allowing these thoughts to run rampant in your mind. You can take action, you can do something about it. And that's what I want to empower you to do with this episode. Okay. So, action steps I want to leave you with: journal your top 3 reoccurring thoughts. Okay. If they're negative, if they're positive, whatever they are, just journal your top 3. Identify the source of those thoughts. Is it yourself? Is it from culture? Is it maybe a spiritual attack? Is it from social media? Identify where it's coming from, and then replace each one with a truth backed affirmation or scripture that can help you nudge that thought out and allow you to force in whatever the positive thought you want instead. Hopefully, this was helpful. As always, appreciate you tuning in. DM me or comment with a thought that you'll want to replace this week with something that you feel like is reoccurring that you want to overcome. And I would love to hear it. I'd love for us to just flood the comments with some things that we are overcoming, because I feel like that'll just be a rising tide raising all ships. Yeah, a rising tide raising all ships. All right, so that's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Let's Parlay. Hope that you've been encouraged to bet on yourself and pursue all that life has in store for you. God bless and have yourself a good day. Okay.